It wasn't too long ago, in the 1990s, amidst what many called the culture wars, many conservative and evangelical leaders bemoaned the decline of what they called family values. And in the midst of that, there was a sociologist, a woman named Stephanie Coontz, who'd done an extensive sociological research, and she published her research in a book titled The Way We Never Were. And in it, looking at historical data, sociological data, she tried to challenge the stereotypes, the myths we had about what the family looked like in the 50s and 60s. The kind of father knows best image. Now, I was curious when coming up with that. I wondered how many people knew what father knows best was. None of the younger people raised their hands, I tell you. Not that I was alive when they made that, but that was the image, of course, the metaphor, the stereotype of what family values is supposed to look like. And families did look different back then. The majority of families were the two-parent with 2.2 kids, and many of the families, the divorce rate was lower, and marriage did seem, and families did seem and appear to be much more stable. But when she analyzed the data, when she looked at the information, what was interesting was she found that actually that mythical time of fathers know best was not as clear-cut as we might think. Yes, divorce rates were much lower, but the reason for that wasn't that people were happier in their marriage. The reason was, and I know younger people may find this hard to believe, the reason was that women couldn't support themselves financially outside the home. They were totally dependent on the husband to support them. So what she found was information and indications that women weren't any happier in their marriages in the 50s and 60s than they were in the 90s. They just couldn't leave. Heck, women couldn't even have credit cards under their own name, right? And actually, the average age when people got married was 18. And what she discovered, and when looking at the sociological historical data, was that people in society in general wasn't much happier at all, despite the image of the fathers know best. That actually there were data and statistics that indicated abuse was more prevalent, marital unhappiness more prevalent back then than it was in the 90s. The world did not look like what we saw in the image of fathers knows best. And the world does look, the family itself does look really different today than it did. Now, the average age when people get married is in their upper 20s. Divorce rates are up, it's true, compared to the 50s and 60s. But in actuality, the family today looks very different. In fact, if we looked around us, we'd see how different that family looks. In many ways, gay marriage is legal now, and it wasn't in the 50s and 60s. We can see many different kinds of family structures, blended families, single-parent households. You may not be aware of this, and this may startle you, but maybe you won't be surprised. But if in the U.S. Census, when they do a look at households, in almost all our communities, the two-parent, 2.2 kids is not the majority of households. Here in Des Moines, if we looked at the majority of households, it would be two people without kids. combined with single-person households. The world or families look very different than they did just 30 or 40 years ago. That's not saying anything startling at all. And yet, you still might hear among religious leaders and among many churches hand-wringing about this fear that the family values decline is leading to the ruination of society in general. And still can hear some of that conversation around those questions, those family values that they like to point to. And what's interesting about that is they often root that in some interpretation of the Bible, some sense of family values being biblical values. The Bible tells us these are the family values we're supposed to hold on to. Now, unfortunately, I've never had a Bible speak to me, literally. I've interpreted Scripture, but what's interesting is that if we really looked at Scripture, it's not an expression particularly of the family values that they would propose. And it's true today that we still struggle with this. Most churches in our communities today, most churches will not recognize gay marriage. I mean, our church will, but even within the Presbyterian church, and we made that decision as a church to allow particular congregations, even in the midst of that, a number of Presbyterians left the church for the radical idea that the church would recognize gay marriage. And there are still many espousing from pulpits and from lecterns arguing that this family values conflict is at the heart of the ruination of our society. And again, they point to Scripture to make that argument. And what's interesting, if you've read the Bible, it's actually rather startling in the different family values, the different structures and cultural norms about families that we would find scandalous. Multiple wives, children by different women contained within one household. Heck, Jesus was the son of an unwed teenage mother. The Bible does not present an image of Father knows best. And in fact, one of the most interesting stories is this story of Ruth in this family that's created. And it starts, I guess, somewhat traditionally enough. Naomi has her two sons, Mary, Orpah, and Ruth, and they make a family. And then when they pass away, Naomi, in a compassionate way, says to Orpah and Ruth, please, my sons have died, you need to go and find more husbands. Now, in a culture, in a society in which women's very survival depended upon finding a husband to care for them and feed them, she was compassionately sacrificing herself so that they wouldn't have to share in her deprivation. And I love the line in the Scripture, for it says that Orpah kissed her, and then it's implied that she left. But the line is, Ruth clung to her. And what's interesting about that is that Ruth expresses a particular kind of family value, a real family value that's so important, and it's captured in the words she says to her Naomi. She embraces Naomi's struggle, her pain. She is willing to journey with her no matter what. That is the ultimate family value. For she says, where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. So family for Ruth wasn't rooted in some biology. It was rooted in this commitment, this compassion, this willingness to embrace and empathize with this woman who she is not even related to. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people are my people. So the family value in Scripture is rooted not in biology or a particular cultural norm. A family values that we embrace as followers of Jesus, as children of God, is a commitment and compassion to other people. In fact, I would argue that the most important families to us are the ones we choose, as much as the ones we are born into. Now, we use the word often, we often talk about church family. And it's kind of sometimes a quaint term, but I think if we really lived out the biblical idea of family values, those words that Ruth gave to us are words that we as a church, when we're connected to each other on Sunday mornings, when we join the church, those are words that we should be saying to each other every Sunday morning, right? Where you go, I go. Your people are my people. That's the true family value represented in Scripture and in God's family. Now, one of the most profound experiences of family I ever had was when I was serving a church in Stillwater, Oklahoma, right next door to Oklahoma State University. And even in the midst of Oklahoma, in the midst of the Bible Belt, our church had extended an invitation. This was back in the 90s. Had extended an invitation to a number of students, to the organizations at Oklahoma State University, offering to them, to those students, particularly members of the GLBT community, an opportunity, a safe place for gay and lesbian women to come together and to find support for each other, but also to explore their spirituality, to explore the Bible and what it has to say to their lives. And many of these gay and lesbian people were often students and were often wrestling with and had been beaten over the head by Scripture, which they've been told basically denied their humanity. So we created this safe space in which every week this group would gather and pray and do Bible study and share our lives. And I think I was the only straight person in the group. I was the black sheep, I think. But that group, which soon began to call itself the Circle of Friends, became this, I can't help but describe it, this profound sense of family together. And existed for a number of years. In fact, part of my journey with this circle of friends was, this was about the time I met Teresa, and we got married, and as many of you know my story, within a year had a kid, and this circle of friends, this family walked with me that journey in my life, and we walked with each other, and it was really amazing to experience their lives, their struggles. It was to be connected to each other, and we, in the midst of that, a number One discovered he had HIV. Over the years, one of them died from AIDS. Two of them are now married today. But it was in sharing our lives, it was being connected, it was being bound by this commitment and compassion, this embrace and empathy, the most important family values there ever can be, that this family, which I was not born into, profoundly impacted me even today. We still keep in touch 20 years later. So I invite you this week to reflect on that family value of love and compassion, the people you choose to make your people, the people you choose to be bound together in the truth of God's love. To God be the glory this day and forevermore. Amen.